Hi everyone, very warm greetings from Europe, from Augsburg in Germany, and from this recorded form. My name is Danica Stojanovic. I'm currently a PhD student at the University of Augsburg, and today I will tell you, or rather I will share some of my thoughts on Harry Potter and the magic of modern mythology. Now, I believe you're all familiar with this one, but I'm going to read it out for you anyway, because Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive were proud to say they were perfectly normal, thank you very much. They were the last people you'd expect to be involved in anything strange or mysterious, because they just didn't hold with such nonsense. They were also the last people one would expect to be involved in the creation of the most beguiling and dazzling magical modern myth, that is to say, the myth of Harry Potter and the Boy Who Lived. Because as soon as Harry scampered out of his cupboard under the stairs only to be met with his pudgy, spoiled cousin, were the hearts of the readers won over, and Harry Potter became a self-fulfilling prophecy, because there hardly is a child in the world who doesn't know his name. On today's agenda, or rather Harry Potter and the academic agenda, I will quickly brief you on magic of mythopoeia, rather what mythopoeia is and how it works, how myths are created and why it matters in the 21st century, through the perspective of Harry Potter's great appeal to the masses, the relatability, familiar framework and the fantasy setting, in order to support my hypothesis that Harry Potter is really the modern myth, the myth of the 20th and 21st century, which will persist as much as Greek mythology had. Now, to begin with a bit of theory, mythopoeia is the act of creating new mythology, and the term is generally accredited to Tolkien, who wrote his poem on mythopoeia, in which he believes that mythopoet is a person who manages to create a secondary world with its own religious structures, rather myth. And well, once upon a time, when people did not have any access to scientific inquiry nor ways to explain the world, they sought to fill out the knowledge gaps through creating stories. And these stories were not just about spinning the yarn around the bonfire and trying to, let's say, alleviate the pressure of being a Greek god, or rather to justify their cheating activities, but rather they were all about finding this place of truth, which is everywhere and nowhere, and to which we're always going to home. That is to say, we always see myths as parts of ourselves, parts of our own stories, and they are just as much tales as they are linguistic constructs. They're abstractions and personifications of ideals, hopes, dreams, and ambitions, sometimes shown as human, sometimes shown in various other forms, but in any case, always relatable and always carrying traces of that culture with them. Now, in order for a myth to succeed, there are several hurdles that myth actually might need to jump. But the person creating a myth needs to be able to access the gap in the knowledge from the perspective in which a myth would be both accessible, appealing to the masses, and easily regenerated, because the narratives being disseminated, retold, recounted all the time, reinterpreted, and simply understood differently, guarantee that mythology regenerates itself and actually manages to ingrain itself in the subconsciousness. It is a cultural product which is manipulated and disseminated by storytellers, because the storyteller always has the power over what he is saying, or rather what he or she is saying. So these stories are always deepening and evolving. If we take a look at various traces of Greek mythology, the oldest ones, for example, fates, were sometimes described as only one person deciding on the fate of dead people. Sometimes there were 9, but at some point it was consensually agreed that there were 3. One of them to measure the lifeline, the other one to decide where it's cut, and the third one to just make sure it's done. As such, mythology also carries various social mores within this communicative consensus. And these mores are translated into real world. So not only do we tell stories to entertain ourselves and our listeners, we're also transferring cultural knowledge and the mores and norms of behavior, rather what is acceptable and what is not, and what the consequences might be. So for example, if we would like to point out that cheating on someone is not necessarily the best course of action, then we might tell stories about Zeus being bashed by his wife, or rather the consequences of what happens when he does his business around Earth with people and otherwise. But how do we actually create myths? Mythology is actually a social system which is legitimized by the claim of supernatural authority. Gods in particular were the ones setting this or rather posing as this authority, setting the rules and norms that people used to adhere to. They're all predicated on shared and collective belief, and they have to appeal to the masses, because if the mass doesn't accept the new myth does not get disseminated. Mythology depends on its believers. For as long as there are believers, the mythology itself will exist, or rather the gods might be fed in this linguistic form. Mythology is inseparable from the society, and the creator is as much as a member as a recipient and as a storyteller. So they tell stories about themselves, to themselves, and about the rest of the world. However, as science slowly developed and rational and logical thought became prevalent, especially in the age of enlightenment, myths were pushed aside. However, this does not mean that mythology disappeared. I would just argue that mythology evolved with the times and was transferred into some other form. So instead of gods of thunder, nowadays we have gnomes tying the headphone cables in our pockets, but the story is always moving from evolution, from chaos to order, evolving from void into the world, and so on and so forth. So when those little gnomes actually do tie your headphones and other various cables, you might want to resort to some other gods. Obviously, there are gods of Wi-Fi right now, and we're all doing our Lion King thing with the phones whenever we don't have access to Wi-Fi. And mythology survives in various form, but still. It can also be traced in literature up to this day. Greek myths or other symbolism, allegory are found in various contemporary works, and as time went on, other spheres of modern or rather contemporary at the time mythology were added to it. So, for example, no one would actually dare to disparage the rationality of Sherlock Holmes or to doubt Atticus Finch's judgment. And I would argue that Harry Potter joins this literary mythological group, creating new social structures and new ideas. Now, what happens with Harry? Let's make this journey from Platform 9 and Myth Quarters. Harry's background is actually what foregrounds this myth. Harry is an orphan. He does not come from a happy family, or rather he was torn from his happy family and thrown into one that made sure that he would be unhappy. But as soon as we saw Harry being yelled by his Aunt Petunia at and forced to make breakfast, while Dudley is literally rolling on the floor screaming about his 37 birthday presents not being enough, we were taken by this boy. The readers and everyone, we as academics and the readers, must have felt a desire to protect him or to identify with him and share the resentment he feels for the Dursleys. In that sense, Harry has already gained the affection of his audience. He already appeals to this mass, which is the first major hurdle any new myth needs to overcome. In addition to that, he is telling a story that is very close to home. So he is not the perfect character. Harry is definitely not the smartest, the most diligent character in the series, but he is relatable because he has great interest in sports. He is good at Quidditch. He is your typical jock. Some moderate magical talents. He is as hot-headed as one can be, but his flaws make him real. And let's face it, when Harry gives us a mixture of everyday life combined with magic and his adventures usually at the end of the school year, the readers have the chance to become immersed in his narrative. So we visit Harry's classes, listen to Professor McGonagall or Professor Snape, and while Harry may not be good at potion making, he is certainly good at conveying this narrative. So we already have an accessible myth, or rather an accessible narrative, which promises to become a myth through its relatability. Harry makes everything more appealing, and who hasn't wished that they could sit and share those, well, mouth-watering meals in the Great Hall, or just visit Honeydukes, or Fred and George's visiting Weasley's shop. It gives us an entry point. It gives the reader an entry point into the narrative, which promises to become mythological in scope. In addition to that, as I said, myths were used to explain natural phenomena which people did not have any scientific explanations for. And magic in Harry Potter's case is actually what parallels the existence of mythology. Magic is used to explain any natural occurrences that would otherwise be completely impossible to conceive of. And while we are rooted in the conventional reality, to borrow another Tolkien's term, we are exploring the magical world and seeing it from the perspective of a child. Another aspect to magic being taking on the mythical form is the fact that magic emerges at the time, especially in children, at the time when children are learning the aspects of potentiality. They are just leaving this operational stage in which they are bound by rules and inhibitions, and they're trying to figure out how the world could be changed. And this is what changes when children, who sometimes excited and sometimes scared, experience their first outbursts of magic. They get the chance to explore this venue even further and change the world by using the magic. So magic provides solutions to people's problems as well as storytelling devices, and readers get the chance to extend this thinking of potentiality through reading about Harry's adventures. So not only do we get the chance to actually experience a magical setting, we get the chance to consider what it would be like if this were actually possible. On the other hand, there is a sense of magical curiosity, expansion, and exploration, as well as justification for events that we do not necessarily need to explain, or we are not able to explain. So, for example, when Voldemort destroys the Brockdale Bridge, its destruction is something that people cannot easily comprehend. Yeah, sure, the infrastructure may have been bad and bridges collapse here and there, but thousands of deaths are not so easily explained, because there will always be someone who is related to people who had died who will simply ask themselves, why? Why did this happen? Why did this happen to me? And magic comes in here. It wasn't just an accident, it was someone's wrongdoing, in this case, Voldemort's. But before we go on into rather gloomy topics, I would just like to explore one aspect of mythological reinvention in Harry Potter, that would be the trickster discourse and the magical curiosity that students explain. And while it is sometimes argued that Harry Potter is most about rote learning, because students just note down lots of things and write essays about it and tell and retell those things, and that is effectively what Hermione does. She learns things off by heart and recites them at any given opportunity. This could reflect negatively on students' ability to think in more creative ways, but in order to become extremely well-versed in magic, students are invited to experiment, and this is embedded in the trickster discourse. And I know what you're thinking, Fred and George are exactly the types that we could explore today, but Fred and George, as well as Marauders, that is to say Wormtail, Moony, Patman, and Prongs, are very obvious examples. There are two extreme cases, and today I opted to tell you a bit about Dumbledore as the actual trickster of the series, operating for the greater good, effectively. Albus Dumbledore was indeed a great teacher and great headmaster, in which he already imbues himself with the trickster discourse, as tricksters never stop learning. They always seek new ways to learn something. Harry gives us the perspective of Dumbledore already being an exceptional wizard, and even though he had taught himself everything, at least that's what J.K. Rowling says, Albus Dumbledore also ventured into various magical experimentation, although of course never into the dark arts. He was mostly concerned with achieving this great good, or rather greater good. And even his ventures with Gellert Grindelwald did not last for too long. As soon as he understood the consequences of what Grindelwald actually had wanted to do, he decided to remove himself from that sphere. He found himself a position at Hogwarts and turned to research. His papers were published in various, for example, in magical academic journals such as Transfiguration Today and so on. And in addition to that, he was really an extremely eloquent character, the one who could really spin the yarn in a way that would make you believe him whatever he tells you. And this is what makes him an actual trickster. This is particularly noticeable in those times when the Ministry of Magic is trying to deny Voldemort's return. And Dumbledore is using every sort of power that he can to undermine him, to undermine them. When he died and left the will and left his will behind, bequeathing his Illuminator and the Sword of Gryffindor and the Snitch, as well as the Tales of Biddle the Bard, to Harry, Ron, and Hermione, he had been aware that the Ministry would try and crack the codes he had left them. However, the way he phrased things made it impossible for them to do, and somehow still accessible to the protagonist trio. Of course, Harry Potter is, of course, when it comes to Harry Potter, you know, Albus Dumbledore is definitely the most quotable character, which kind of just supports the claim that he is the best wordsmith in the series. But Albus Dumbledore was also manipulative. He had decided to work in favor of the greater good, but he also made it clear that he was ready to make hard choices. So when he does not tell Harry that he is the last Horcrux, Dumbledore still counts on his ability, or rather on Harry's ability, to believe everything he had told him beforehand and opt to trust that, rather than the fact that Dumbledore had been aware of the fact that Harry needs to die in order for Voldemort to be destroyed. Now, of course, as any myth out there in Greek mythology, Roman mythology, and so on and so forth, so does Harry Potter. And there are certain social ideals that the franchise promotes, some of them being listed here. Of course, mythological teachings of telling right from wrong are present in Harry Potter too, which is why I opt to see it from the meta-mythological point of view. And one of the examples is personal initiative, something that really takes courage to do, rather to take action and choose between what is right and what is easy, and to pursue that belief. Of course, the whole series is embedded with the narrative of acceptance, the presence of various magical creatures, which are sometimes, some of them of intelligence superior to humans as well as the others, points to the utopian vision in which J.K. Rowling operates. And while there are no mentions of people, for example, with various skin colors, which is something that J.K. Rowling is often chided for, the series still promotes the acceptance of others, for example, house elves, which I will use as an example today. House elves who are viewed as a parallel, or rather allegorical representation of slavery, who are willing to listen to their masters at any cost, to punish themselves if they perceive that they had done something wrong. And we have three approaches to house elves. We have Harry, who has never seen one and just treats Dobby for the first time as an equal. Hermione, who goes a step further and reads everything she can in the library, forms the SPEW in order to promote the welfare of house elves. And we have Ron, who takes the longest time to actually accept that house elves have feelings and deserve to be able to make decisions on their own. Nevertheless, Ron's actions in the Battle of Hogwarts, where he says that house elves should be alerted and sent home lest they die in the battle, shows that the potential of the series to change belief systems. And Ron takes, I would say, almost 4 years to achieve this, but translated into or rather beyond form, beyond the book, it shows that it is possible with careful thoughts and personal engagement and both effective and rational approach to it, one can change their belief systems. So this is an idealized world which is governed by magic and forces for good, but it does not negate the presence of inequality, the presence of somewhat darker aspects of the society, of violence, aggression, murder even. Nevertheless, as proper fantasy does, still promotes the best we can do. The Mirror of Feelings, let's say, points out that it does take a great deal of bravery to stand up to our enemies, but just as much to stand up to our own selves. And Harry Potter is the best example of how much it actually takes to accept one's feelings, to accept oneself in that sense. Harry has experienced death all around him ever since he was a little boy. His parents were murdered brutally in favor of the faulty information, Voldemort believing that this would actually make sure that he could reign supreme forever. Other parental, especially father figures that Harry had, like Sirius, Dumbledore, Hagrid, they all disappeared over the years. They were not accessible, pointing out that the world was not going to coddle Harry, but there were things that were always worth dying for. Harry faces and accepts his personal grief in order to keep others from harm's way, which is something that takes great courage. And love, as the pivotal force driving the franchise forwards, shows that it does take a great deal of bravery to feel in spite of pain it might cause. It is the ideal of purity of emotion that is set against the supreme evil of Horcruxes, and love, no wonder, is the only force that can actually defeat them. As I said, the ability to choose for oneself, the ability to feel, and the ability to form cultural practices makes this series mythopoetic in that sense, as those cultural practices are particularly noticeable with the emergence of convergence culture and Harry Potter worship, which moves beyond simple reading. There are numerous fan pilgrimages. Let's say Harry Potter has definitely conquered King's Cross Station in London, Universal Studios. There is such thing as a Grey School of Wizardry and a similar Polish live-action role-play experience in which students or rather participants get the chance to become Hogwarts students and to immerse themselves in the narrative as much as they can. And of course, there is Pottermore as the online platform offering probably the only legitimate Hogwarts sorting quiz, as well as the Patronus quiz, the wand purchasing experience. And through these, the fans get the chance to personalize the whole franchise, to identify it with the myth itself, and therefore internalize it. And I am not going to lie, I do have my Ravenclaw robes right next to me. It's quite warm here today, but I am sporting the blue colors, and I believe that many of us here have already done so. We have done a bit of cosplay, we have visited some Harry Potter places, and we are engaging with the franchise on an academic level, which also belongs to the sphere of cultural practices that surround every myth. So not only do we read Harry Potter, not only do we write about it from a scientific point of view, we actively engage, promote, disseminate, and regenerate cultural practices, making sure that myth itself continues to exist. And let's face it, moving beyond the veil of the story, Harry Potter has become a cultural leitmotif, a source of comfort and inspiration, as well as a fully customizable experience to all of us. It has ensured its own dissemination, both through fan festival, publication events, various reprintings, movies, nowadays, of course, the theater play, possible new future installments, fan fictions, and so on and so forth. It has turned into a globally accessible modern myth. And let's face it, it's been more than 20 years since Harry Potter was first published. Time has not pained Harry at all. All was well. Thank you.